All right, so what factors affect buyers' demand for goods? What factors affect sellers' supply of goods? There are a number of each of those factors. You will have to know them and be able to apply them. You, yes, must memorize them. Think of it like this. How much faster is doing math if you know your times tables? You have to know these in order to be able to apply them to get to the higher level stuff that we'll do later on. Okay? How does supply and demand determine the price of a good and this isn't showing for you. So how do supply and demand determine the price of a good and the quantity sold? And that's all about creating the graph and simply reading the graph. How do changes in the factors that affect demand or supply affect the market supply? So when you look at the factors that affect demand for a good or supply for a good, they can cause supply or demand to increase or decrease. And as that happens and you lay it on the supply and demand curve, that changes the price. You have to be able to graph these and correctly read the graph. And then the final question is, how do markets allocate resources? For those of you who are photographers, this is the final line on this slide. Put that finger down, please. Thank you. All right, so we're going to start with some very basic and fundamental stuff. A market is where buyers and sellers show up to deal in a particular product. A competitive market is one where there are so many buyers and sellers that no individual buyer or seller has a disproportionate impact upon the price of the good in the market. Meaning, if I'm selling Dum-Dums in here for 5 cents a piece, and you guys are all the market, if I raise the price, I'm the only seller in the market. And so that has a disproportionate impact on the market. But if one half of the class is buyers and one half of the class is sellers, then any one of you who doubles the price of the Dum-Dum isn't going to have an impact on the overall price of Dum-Dums in the class because people just won't buy from that one person. Yes, Hannah?
So like when it says it in the definition of it, what does that last one say that you don't have a big
has a negligible effect. Negligible means tiny, insignificant impact on price. So that's what I was saying. So if one half of the classroom was all selling Dum-Dums at 5 cents a piece, and one seller in that half of the classroom, 1 out of 16 people, said, I'm doubling the price, that person simply wouldn't have any buyers at that price. It wouldn't change the overall price of Dum-Dums in the market. The buyers would simply go to the other sellers who are selling for 5 cents a piece. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Whereas if I were the only seller and I said, oh, they're going to 6 cents a piece, either you buy them from me at 6 cents or you don't buy them at all. And that's not a competitive market. Okay? In our examples, we're going to live in a perfectly competitive market. And what that means in a perfectly competitive market is all of the goods are exactly the same. So in our perfectly competitive market, the ingredients in Tide are exactly the same as they are in Cheer, as exactly the same as they are in another laundry detergent. Okay? They're all exactly the same. Now we know that that doesn't exist. But for the purposes of constructing our model, we have to act like it exists. Okay? We can't deal with those other differences. Okay? In our perfectly competitive market, there are so many buyers and sellers that no one can impact market price. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of buyers and sellers, and nobody gets to shift market price for all of these goods that are exactly the same. And like I said, in this chapter, We're talking about perfectly competitive markets. No one has the ability to mess with the market in terms of producing a good that's just a little better, or no one can alter the price to mess with the market. There are some definitions that you're going to just have to be able to regurgitate. Not for the value of the regurgitation, but for the understanding and application that comes with it. Okay. For quantity demanded, you need to know two things for quantity demanded. It's the quantity of a good that buyers are willing and able to purchase. Willing and able to purchase. So if I ask you how many of you would love to own a sports car, and everybody raised their hand, great. Do I have quantity demanded of 30? No, because I've only asked how many of you are willing to purchase a sports car. When I ask how many of you are also able to purchase a sports car, that's when we get quantity demanded. So if I pulled out a Snickers bar and said, how many of you want this Snickers? Everybody raised their hand. Yep, Dayton's right in there. Okay. How many of you are also able to purchase this Snickers? Dayton raised his hand. What don't you know yet, Dayton?
What the price is.
Yeah. So Dayton must have 100 in his pocket, because I could go high. But he's already indicated that his quantity demand is 1 for that Snickers. Okay. Now, your quantity demanded can be different at different prices. Dayton may only want 1 Snickers if I'm charging $10, but he may want 10 if I'm charging $1. Yeah, we got really excited at that. That's kind of it's kind of alarming. I notice you don't have a sandwich today. Oh dear. All right. Now, law of demand. The claim that the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises, other things being equal. Austin, you'd better get off your phone. Okay? I have another word for you for other things equal. I want you to learn this Latin phrase. It's what your college professors will use. When they say other things equal, they're not going to say that. They're going to say ceteris paribus. Ceteris paribus. And it's all other things remaining constant. Paribus, parity. Ceteris paribus. Then I'm going to give you the shorthand way to write out the law of demand. Quantity demanded, that's how you do shorthand quantity demanded, increases as price falls. Quantity demanded decreases as price increases. Ceteris paribus. We call this what kind of a relationship? It is an inverse relationship. Demand has an inverse relationship. Think about it as a consumer. If you're buying stuff, do you want more of it the more expensive it gets? No. This is common sense. You already know this. You already know this. But what you have to now know is how to say it economically. Okay? What is the instance in which this might not hold true? If you are in Florida and Hurricane Irma, who is now a Category 5, by the way, is approaching you, You might actually want more plywood even though the price is going up. But that ignores ceteris paribus. In any normal situation, you don't want more of something as the price goes up. Are you with me? Questions at this point?
So does ceteris paribus, does that mean equal?
Ceteris paribus means, so when they say all other things being equal, it means nothing else changes. Nothing else changes. Everything else remains constant. The only thing that's changing is price. And so your quantity demanded will change in reaction to the change in price. Nothing else changes. You don't suddenly develop cancer or diabetes or whatever it is in the situation. There isn't suddenly a category 5 hurricane barreling down on you. Just how much plywood do you want? How much plywood do you want if I double the price? Manual.
Are we going to have to come up with exceptions in the future?
No. No. You're always going to evaluate a circumstance that is given to you.
Are there any other words on this slide?
There are no other words on this slide. And I erased your shorthand.
Already
Sorry.
pictured that.
Okay, good. All right. Mental note, add that for the folks at home. All right. So, a demand schedule. Fancy title for a table. A demand schedule is simply a table of the numbers from which you will construct the graph. I will tell you guys that this chapter is very, very, very graph intensive. And if you want to make your lecture lives easy, you'll print out the pre-baked lecture notes that are on Canvas. What are you smirking about, Andrew? Okay. All right, so in our demand schedule, we're going to talk about Helen. And Helen has a latte fixation. She loves her lattes. You're going to see when I show you Helen's demand schedule for lattes how much Helen loves her lattes. The woman is highly caffeinated. If lattes were free, if lattes cost $0, Helen would take 16 of them a day.
Wow.
I think Helen has a problem. Helen probably also has a catheter. If they're only $1 a piece, Helen will drink 14 lattes in a day. Helen is apparently also independently wealthy. $14 a day in lattes.
But you
Holy
don't eat
moly.
any other food, think about it. You just drink lattes.
Helen also has rickets. Okay? So you can see, does the law of demand hold up here? As the price increases, Helen's quantity demanded decreases. Helen has a problem because at $6 a piece, she'll not only drink one latte, she'll drink 4. Guys, this is what the demand schedule for cigarette smokers looks like as well. This is the demand schedule for an addiction. Okay. All right, so now we can take these numbers and turn them into a graph. One dot and another and another and another. Oh, and then when we connect the dots, and I'm going to call it a curve, even though many of you will point out that it is, in fact, a straight line. We call it a curve because in reality it is curved. But for our example purposes and for the examples and practice graphs that you're going to draw, you are, until we get very deep into this, you're going to draw straight lines because it's easier for you to read and interpret, okay? But they are in the real world curves. All right, so what is the difference between market demand and individual demand? When we're looking at Helen and her lattes, we're looking at individual demand. But we can then go through all of the consumers in the market for lattes and add up their demands. And what do we get? We get market demand. So we're going to enter a very, very small world here. In this market, only Helen and Ken consume lattes. Our market consists of two individuals. So when we take each of their individual demands for lattes and add them together, we will have market demand for lattes. So there's Helen's issues. Okay? And Ken, not quite the latte junkie that Helen is. When we add them up, we get market demand.
So if there was like 1,000 people, you would just add up the thousands of people and that would be your market?
Yes. Yes. Now, would you actually ever go out and poll all of the people who lived in a community to find out their demand for all of the varied goods that are available? No, you don't. But to get you to understand foundationally how this works, we're going step by step, slowly through the process. Okay, so now we can take those market demand quantities and graph them. Are you here with being able to graph demand? Quantity. Price and quantity. You always put price on the y-axis and always put quantity on the x-axis. Period. No debating. No, but I would. No. Price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis. Every time.
So if you ever have to draw a graph and we do it backwards, is it gonna be
It'll be wrong. Even if you draw it right. Because what's going to happen is when you lay supply on it, it won't work.
Is that why you always have to put price on that side?
What?
Is that why you always have to put price on that side?
You always put price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. And demand will always go upper left to lower right because of the law of demand. It's just easier on you to not argue with it and do it this way. Andrew? Were you going to what if me?
I was going to why?
Because I said so.
Is there like legitimate?
Because you will never find an economist anywhere in the world, even in the Arabic world where they write right to left, who graphs supply and demand any differently than this. Price is always on the y-axis, quantity is always on the x-axis. Period.
First.
Let me remind you who sunk the quiz for you. All right. Demand curve shifters. So on the curve, you get to see how price affects quantity demanded, ceteris paribus. Okay. There are other things that affect quantity demanded. Other things beyond price. Because you've already seen how price changes quantity demanded. But there are other things that can change demand. They are called non-price determinants. Non-price determinants can change quantity demanded. Okay. I emphasize non-price determinants. Okay. Changes in non-price determinants will change demand. Okay. Let me give you a concept. That entire curve is demand. Any given point on the curve is quantity demanded at whatever price you've pointed at on the curve. So demand is made up of all of the quantities demanded at all of the prices, but the curve is demand. And price can never change demand. Price can only change quantity demanded, because price is on the axis. So if you change price, you can only change which point on the curve you're pointing at. Does that make sense in theory? I like all of the nodding heads. Good, because I'm going to proceed to confuse the snot out of you. And I will have you wanting to change demand for many other things. But you can only ever change demand when you change non-price determinants. You can only ever change demand when you change non-price determinants. Okay. Shorthand for writing these. Make yourself a list of things that will change demand. Okay, things that will change demand. What symbol is that? Delta, which means change. Okay. So your first reason for change in demand is a change in the number of buyers. You can write it out in a full sentence if you want, but you're going to get sick of it real quick. Okay. If you get an increase in the number of buyers in the market for that good, that's going to mean that each one of those buyers is going to want to buy something in that good, and they're going to cause the demand curve to shift. So if the number of buyers in the market for this good, which is still our lattes, right? Okay. Prices have dropped, temperatures have dropped. It's suddenly fall, pumpkin spice season, right? And the number of buyers in the market for lattes has increased because it got cold. The demand curve is going to shift because quantity demanded at every price will increase because there are now more people who want lattes. People who won't drink lattes at 80 will suddenly drink them at 70. The prices, okay? So we have increased demand. The whole curve shifted. What do you suppose happens if we decrease the number of buyers in the market? The whole curve shifts to the left. Okay. Now, this is going to be a difficult thing for you. Demand and supply both increase and decrease, but the curves never shift up and down. The curves only ever shift left and right. If you say the demand curve went up, you're going to be in trouble. And you'll see why when we get to supply. Because in supply, when the curve goes up, it's moving to the left, which is actually a decrease. Okay? So supply and demand can go up and down, but you're better off if you say increase and decrease for your own mental clarity, and the curves shift to the left or to the right. Never say the curve goes up or the curve goes down. You'll confuse yourself. Because for the next week, you're going to sit here and look at a graph and try and figure out whether it's supply or demand. Then you'll have to go back to the law of demand. Okay, as price goes up, the quantity goes, okay, so that's demand. Got it? Another. Set my marker down. Where did I set my marker down? Okay, the shorthand for this one is change in consumer income. Why is it important that we say consumer income? Because producer income doesn't change demand. So a change in consumer income. Why do we care if people are making more money? Well, because later on in the year we're going to talk about how to leave more money in people's pockets by cutting taxes or lowering interest rates. And we want to know what impact that's going to have on demand when we do that. So a change in consumer income. Now, there are two types of goods. There are normal goods. A normal good is a good where if your income increases, you want more of it. And if your income decreases, you want less of it. Okay? A normal good might be ribeye steak. The more money I have in my pocket, the more ribeye steak I want. The less money I have, the less likely I am to buy a ribeye steak. Okay? The other good that is not a normal good is called an inferior good. And your demand for your quantity demanded for an inferior good is inversely related. The less money you have in your pocket, the more inferior good you want. And the more money you have in your pocket, the less inferior good you want. Now, leave your personal preferences out of this. I know some of you believe that you could live until you're 110 on ramen noodles, but I assure you, ramen is an inferior good. Across the market, people buy less ramen the more money they have. Ribeye steaks are a normal good. The more money people have, the more they buy. Hot dogs, inferior good. Okay. I did not say all beef franks. I said hot dogs. It's the ones made with chicken lips and pig snouts.
I love this.
Hot dogs are an inferior good.
It's like my lunch ramen is hot dogs.
Boxed mac and cheese is an inferior good.
Cut the hot dogs up and throw
The
them
more
in.
money you have, the less that you tend to purchase, and the more you tend to do the homemade or the Stouffer's. Okay. Yes, sir.
What if you like add the two inferior goods together, like the hot
If you
dogs
put
and
the
mac
hot
and
dogs
cheese?
in your mac and cheese or your SpaghettiOs, yeah, no, still inferior goods. Okay. There used to be, when I was growing up, a product called beer. I'm not being silly here. It was a white can with black, all caps letters that just said beer. It was plain label beer. It was an inferior good. And the more money you had, the less of that you bought, and the more Budweiser you bought. Okay?
Every high schooler would
Let's
have that.
consider the world of Walmart. Dr. Thunder is an inferior good. Dr. Pepper is a normal good. Okay? Are you with me? Mountain Mist, inferior good.
Is that a mix of Mountain Dew and Sierra Mist?
No, it's like an off-brand of.
It's like the Walmart version of Sprite, I think, or something.
It's Mountain Dew is like lightning. Mountain lightning.
Cola. Just cola. Inferior good. All right? We got that?
Give me some great
All right. The price of related goods. Do not get confused on this one. I said price can never change demand. The price of the good changing can never change demand. But the price of a related good changing can. So a change in the price of a related good. And you are most often going to say a change in the price of a complement or a substitute. And you need to know both of those as specific subcategories of related good, because how demand changes matters, whether it's a change in the price of a complement or a change in the price of a substitute. I will explain.
I would have, like, so an example of that be like a Vizio TV and then like an LG TV, if one of them's cheaper.
No. Those are not
Why are they not
related.
related?
Those are not related goods.
It's the same.
Those are
So
substitutes.
a TV and a DVD player would be related?
Or a TV and an HDMI cable. Or a hot dog and a hot dog bun. Or a car and gasoline. Or a latte and a donut. Things that go together. Cereal and milk. Okay? Now, I want you to think of a change in the price of a substitute as being a separate thing. Just like I want you to know complements are different. Okay? A change in the price of a substitute means that you're going to either buy the original good or you're going to go buy the substitute. Again, leave your personal preferences out of this. For our purposes here, pizza and hamburgers are both nutritional things that you as teen people would eat. Okay? If the price of pizza doubles, you are going to thus demand greater quantities of hamburgers. If the price of hamburgers double, you are thus going to desire greater quantities of pizza. Got it? So, the change in the price of the original good, if we're graphing demand for pizza, and I tell you the price of hamburgers went down, demand for pizza is going to do what? It's going to decrease, it's going to shift to the left. If I tell you to graph demand for hamburgers, is the graph of hamburgers going to change? No, because the price of hamburgers is what went down. You just went from one point on the graph to another point as you went down the y-axis. That's where it starts getting tricky. You have to be very step-by-step sequential in your analysis. Okay? Coke and Pepsi. For some of us, that's not even considered to be a substitute. I would rather drink water than drink Pepsi. So that example falls apart for me personally, but I understand it economically. Laptops and desktops. Samsung and iPhone.
They have desktop.
How old are these slides?
The book is from 2000.
No, these slides that you made.
They're provided by the publisher. They're the same age. CDs and music downloads. I know. Yeah, there are 4-year-old computers behind you that still have CD and DVD burners. So
I like CDs.
yeah, they look pretty in the sunlight. Okay. Complements. Complements are things that go together. These are complements with an E. A complement with an I is a completely different thing.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
How many are we gonna add to that list right now?
A few?
A long list?
No.
Because I'm trying to figure out where to put it.
So should we go with the E or the I? Because you have E there and I there.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, great.
Oops.
My notes are wrong. In pen.
Yes, thank you. Guy's sitting at a bar one day, sitting alone at the bar, drinking a beer. Here's this voice that says, "That is a handsome tie." And he looks around. The bartender's cleared out the other end of the bar. He looks around. He can't figure out. He's like, "Thanks." And here's your welcome. Okay. He's a little unnerved. little bit later, says, "Is that a fresh haircut? Because it looks good." Looks around, checks behind him. There's nobody around. Cannot. It's like, thanks. Just got it yesterday. Appreciate it. A little while later, bartender comes over and he says, "Hey, are you a ventriloquist or something?" Bartender says, "No. Wouldn't be tending bar if I were." He says, "Why do you ask?" And the guy says, I'm trying to figure this out. There's nobody else in here. It's just you and me. And somebody's complimented my tie. Somebody's complimented my haircut. I don't get it." And the bartender says, "Oh, that's nothing. It's just the peanuts. They're complimentary."
Okay, I want Andrew to have this lecture.
Please shame.
Terrible pun.
You'll never get that minute back. That's right. Okay.
I wasn't ready for it. I was like, wow, that was a really let down.
Computers and software go together. Your computer is a brick if you don't have software to go on it. So as the price of the computer goes up, you're less likely to buy software. As the price of the software goes up, you're less likely to buy a computer. So with complements, the demand for the goods moves together. With substitutes, the demand for the goods moves in opposite directions. There's an inverse relationship between demand for substitutes, and there is a direct relationship between demand for complements. Do you understand the difference? Popcorn and movie theater ticket prices. The more expensive the movie ticket theater price, do you buy more popcorn or less? But they're compliments, aren't they? Well, they aren't substitutes. There are exceptions to everything. Okay? You can enjoy the movie without the popcorn. You can't use the computer without the software. You can eat a hot dog without a hot dog bun. But it's not commonly done. That's why they're compliments. All right. College tuition and textbooks would be another great example of compliments. You're not going to get a whole lot out of that class if you don't have the book. Bacon and eggs, coffee and creamer.
Can we get a coffee machine?
What?
That sounds good.
Okay. I want you to learn this one as consumer tastes and preferences. It's important that you focus again on the consumer. So this is a change in consumer tastes and preferences. This one is very much about the weather and current fads and that kind of stuff. This one is why bikinis are on clearance sale right now, and if you begin to look, they're stocking coats in the stores. Consumers prefer not to wear bikinis in Nebraska in January. They prefer to be warm and bundled up. Okay? Consumer tastes and preferences. Give me a really hot music star right now.
Taylor Swift.
Okay, Justin Bieber. I heard Justin Bieber.
You made that
So
up.
Justin
I
Bieber,
want to use him.
Justin Bieber appears at some awards show wearing this really cool looking hat. And all of a sudden, demand for that hat shoots up. The reason for the increase in demand for that hat is a change in consumer tastes and preferences. Everybody wants to be a true believer and dress just like their idol Justin, and so their change in tastes and preferences causes them to go and buy that hat.
So,
Okay.
so for when, let's say when KD left the Golden State, or not Golden, went to Golden State, his demand for his jersey went up. So would that be
When Kevin Durant left the Golden State Warriors,
their taste went down because they just burned his jersey. But man went up.
their taste went what? They burned his jersey.
Yeah.
So they preferred not to be associated with Kevin Durant, so demand for his jersey decreased. They were ticked. Those people were, but where did he go from the Golden State
So
Warriors?
he went from the
He went
Thunder to
to
Golden
the
State.
From the Thunder?
The Oklahoma
Yeah,
City Thunder.
two.
Oh my. So the Thunder people burned his jersey, or the Golden State Warriors
Thunder
people burned? Okay, well, that makes sense. Yes, that would be explainable by taste, changing consumer tastes and preferences. Yes. Same thing happened with LeBron when he left Cleveland. All right, so here we go. The Atkins diet. Ask your parents if they remember the Atkins diet. Ask your parents if they tried the Atkins diet. Many people did. So the Atkins diet said, go protein, forget everything else. It was no carbs, very few fruits and vegetables. It was just like all meat all the time. People had the meat sweats 24/7. Okay? Guys, egg prices went up tremendously during the Atkins craze because people were eating so many eggs. It was a change in consumer tastes and preferences. Okay? Right now, the organic food section at the grocery store has begun to occupy more and more feet of shelf space. Some stores have an entire section. Half of the produce section is organic. That is a change in consumer tastes and preferences. 20 years ago, that didn't exist. It just wasn't there. You had to go to a specialty store. You couldn't get it in the real store. We will start tomorrow on slide 15 tomorrow.